kind of why we did it. I think we've been silent too long.
There were short windows of opportunity that I needed to get sober, but St. Stephen never had nobody here. There was no services, and after 4:30, they rolled the sidewalks up, and that's it.
I think there's a lot of value in seeing different perspectives as well, and as a service provider and as a neighbor, we're kind of unique in the sense of we have more than one lens to share.
Welcome to This Week Uncut, where we take a look at the week's top stories from CHCO-TV and The Courier. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki, Hogarth. We begin this week in St. Stephen, where there was a panel and community discussion on homelessness that was organized by Neighborhood Works, which also runs the shelter in St. Stephen. You and I were both there on hand to moderate questions. It was a privilege to be asked to be a part of it. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, so this was an interesting conversation to sit and listen. Each panelist got to present for 5 minutes what they do and sort of what services they offer. And essentially it was an effort to show the community what Neighborhood Works does. And that was important because it sort of seems like the shelter, the homeless shelter, has become largely the focal point in the community because it's creating issues for the neighbors and because it's acutely felt in the community.
And that shelter being at 9 Main Street for about a year's time now, that location. But if everyone can think back to about 2 years ago, that was when Mayor Alan McEachran and the council of the day declared a state of emergency in St. Stephen over the homelessness crisis. And for a small town, that number was somewhere between 70 and 100. There was a head count done by a group of citizens in the community, an organized group of citizens that were able to go out, to meet everyone, to get a real on-the-ground level assessment of what the state was. And we were able to address some of the questions from the community. But again, we do want to go over the panelists for people who weren't able to attend. We will be showing different excerpts from that panel while you're watching This Week Uncut right now. But there was, of course, Neighborhood Works was key to the panel. We had Jim Stewart, the executive director, was one of the main panelists, along with youth director Jessica Brown, as well as adult services director Amanda DeGrucci. But on top of that, there were four other panelists who were added to it. Someone from social services. Tell us a little bit about the other panelists.
Yeah, so someone very important to be at the table was someone from social development, and the assistant deputy minister Bronwyn Davies was at the table. Stephanie Clark and Sam Gullison from the Willow Center were also at the table. And of course, Diane Kearns, a harm reduction expert who has recently retired from Avenue B in St. John. So there was a wealth of knowledge at that table, and plenty of people with lived experience, but also experience dealing with this crisis.
And that was the first half of the discussion, was really a moment for the panelists to give about 5 minutes each on what they do, what their experience is, and how they relate to the conversation. Because obviously when we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about a multitude of issues, also an ecosystem of support, and sometimes within those support, those are where maybe you find holes missing in the community. So it really was taking a look at not just the shelter, but homelessness as it connects to other issues and within the community.
Absolutely. And we're going to let you take a listen to NWI's executive director Jim Stewart on why he decided to host the panel.
So I think it went great. There's lots of people. I was really surprised about the amount of people that showed up. I think there was a good mixture of people that were here, and kind of why we did it. I think we've been silent too long. I'm not one to go out front, as people will know in the media, but we just listened to the community saying, you're silent, we need some, transparency. So I think that's what it was. And to give them an idea that the shelter is only about 80% of what Neighborhood Works does. So give them a round feeling of what we do.
I wanted to ask about the relocation of the shelter. I asked you that question during the Q&A, but there's 2 other properties. I guess, what was your reaction to the relocation motion, and what do you think of that proposal or idea?
Okay, I didn't say this during the panel discussion, but we've never heard of the shelter being moved, other than I kind of took that up with the province when the new bylaws were coming in, and it says phasing it out. So on our standpoint is, if there was a better location, if the province was willing to fund that location, and it's going to cost a lot of dollars, then we'd be there in a second, right? If we could shut down all the shelters now, we'd be there in a second. But every year it has cost money now for 3 years, and each year it costs more money to open these out of the cold or temporary shelters or now permanent shelter. The amount of money that we're putting into that and into a new one really, I think, would be better spent in housing, and that way in the future we'd have less people in the shelter, maybe even be able to shut down the shelter and have housing for people, or appropriate housing.
And is that the next big obstacle that needs to be addressed that you think would make St. Stephen a better community?
Okay, so right now you've heard about the $7.4 million in the bridge funding, so we are going to be putting in a proposal for that. We need to find a space for that as well, and maybe it's one of those properties that the town has said could use that. Our real big push, or my big push, has been on a plan. That it's hard for the community to get behind something if there's no plan. So we need a plan saying the shelter to this, or this. Maybe it's over a 5-year period that this happens. But we need a plan. Like, if we just got the shelter and that's what people think, we just got a shelter, right? That's all we've got. Our guests are the same way. We're stuck in the shelter. There's no real movement. So we need that plan, and that's going to be my push besides housing, because evidence shows you're only going to get further ahead if you've got housing.
That was Neighborhood Works Executive Director Jim Stewart. And I do want to point out, Jim said to us after he saw a clip of this in the news, he said, I actually meant to say, this is why I don't go on camera a lot, then when he said 80% of what we do at Neighborhood Works. What he meant to say is 80% of what they do at Neighborhood Works doesn't revolve around the shelter. It actually is so much more than that. He meant the 80-20 in a different way than 80% being the shelter. He just meant 20% of what they do is the shelter services, but that they do so much more within the community in terms of support. Anyone who's been to one of the family community dinners that they host at Neighborhood Works is well aware of the role they play in the community as a whole.
Right, and I took that opportunity, as any journalist would, to ask about the motion from MDSS, the Municipal District of St. Stephen, to relocate the shelter. And he actually answered this question during the panel, but he basically said, you know, if there was another location and the government was willing to fund it, we would be there. And I believe that to be true. I think it's challenging to ask the provincial government to do anything, but also to do anything quickly. Another great point that he made about that is every dollar that they spend trying to relocate this shelter is money they're not using for supportive, proper housing, appropriate housing. And it costs money to relocate that shelter. Right. And it will cost money to relocate the shelter.
And I will get you to give, for people at home, just a little background on what that motion was and when it was made at council. But I would like to shout out Alan McEachran. Mayor Alan McEachran was at the community conversation. I'm sorry if I miss anyone. I did see Councillor Wade Greenlaw. I saw Councillor David Hyslop as well. MLA Kathy Baucus was also there. And if I'm missing anyone, because there was over 100 people in attendance, so it was really well attended. In true Charlotte County fashion, the only row without people was the front row. That was it. For some reason, we were scared to sit in the front row in Charlotte County. But I thought that was really telling of all these people that came out after Game 7 of the World Series on a Sunday, 2 o'clock, so you still have time to sleep in. But all these people came out to be a part of this conversation, difficult as it was at times.
Well, I will also say Councillor Joyce Wright was there.
Yes.
And the Deputy Mayor was also there, Deputy Mayor Wheaton. So there was a large representation from Council at that panel discussion, which is very important because they're the ones that are being asked to make these decisions. Now, the motion that came to Council was to relocate or remove the shelter from within the municipality's boundaries. Many people at that, especially Mark Grillo, who was a huge part of organizing this panel and participating in it, got to the microphone and he said, where are you going to put them? in the woods. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And, Councillor Joyce Wright actually made that point in her statement on why she wouldn't support this motion, because it needs to be walkable. They need to have access to food, and they need to have access to, the hospital, which is nearby in St. Stephen. So this motion was defeated eventually in a vote of 5-2, so 5 against and 2 for. And it came about after a series of concerns that were raised by the neighbors and businesses working in proximity to the shelter. And there's no question that this has been a disruption to their life. They've given us concrete examples and photographic examples of things that have happened to them and that they're seeing in their community. But Mark Harding, who made that motion, said it wasn't because of those concerns. She'd been wanting to do this for a while. And it was one of the 3 asks that the Concerned Citizens Group asked for, the relocation of the shelter, although nowhere in their ask did they say outside of the municipal boundaries. They asked for increased bylaw enforcement, and they asked for a task force to be created. So the task force has been created. They're going to decide who gets to be on it, and the motion to relocate the shelter has been defeated. And you would have heard Jim say he didn't know that was happening. Right. So, you need to involve the operator as well in these conversations, because they're the ones that are most impacted by how they do their work if there's a disruption to service.
Okay, and also given that the municipal district of St. Stephen, since amalgamation, is quite large, to move it outside of those boundaries would be, to Mark's point, in the woods. Also, I don't know that can you vote to move something outside of the town boundaries? It doesn't seem like that would be in their jurisdiction to make that decision. Maybe to shut down something you could, but I don't know that you could actually move it.
Well, yeah, that was the exact point that Councillor Emily Rodas made. She said, do we even have the authority to be making these kinds of decisions around this table? And procedurally, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think it would be leaning on the side of no. Homelessness and housing is a provincial jurisdiction. The province owns the building in which Neighborhood Works operates the shelter. So it's up to the province, really, to start making decisions about this. And I've spoken to the minister responsible for housing a number of times, David Vicki, and he's been very kind of frank with me about what he believes is the issue. And he says, we understand that what is going on in St. Stephen isn't working, and the status quo can't continue the way that it is. I did push him on whether or not he would relocate the shelter to one of the 2 sites that have been identified under the new municipal plan and zoning bylaw, and he said everything is on the table. So that's a very great political answer. So I don't know what that means, but certainly we will be watching this and paying attention to it.
And I do want to stress for people at home too, on this particular episode of This Week Uncut, we are doing a lot of coverage on the panel and the community conversation that was held on Sunday. It's the beginning of November. If you go back a couple weeks, though, you'll see extensive interviews that Nathalie did. So I recommend also subscribing to our YouTube channel if you happen to be watching this on TV and you want to go back and look at old episodes. About 2 weeks ago, Nathalie interviewed extensively neighbors who felt impacted by the shelter, gave them an opportunity at length to tell their story. It was also in the news as well, but this show offers a longer opportunity to share perspectives. So if you ever feel you want to know more from one side or a different perspective, chances are we film the show every week. We are up to date on what the community concerns are. We did a really great job of covering neighbor concerns as well. A lot of that was on the table too at the panel discussion that we were at. Nathalie and I were tasked with, privileged to be tasked with taking the questions from the community that were brought to that conversation on Sunday and then asking them of the panel. So we went around throughout while the panelists were all delivering their 5 minutes, explaining what their role is within the ecosystem of dealing with homelessness. We received questions directly from the public so that they felt they could give them anonymously. We brought those questions up to the front and then asked them of the panelists. We kicked off with a question we get a lot here at CHCO and The Courier, which is, are the people experiencing homelessness and using the shelter in St. Stephen actually from St. Stephen or in and around St. Stephen and from Charlotte County? And again, we had the answer that yes, pretty much all of them. There might be maybe 2 to 3 people at times that aren't from the community, but chances are they have close ties to Charlotte County. There really are more services in a bigger city center. For Charlotte County, St. Stephen is it. So there are people, they did mention them panelists, some from St. Andrews, St. George, that, still Charlotte County. But yes, obviously there's much more that you can get access to in St. Stephen than you would in St. Andrews. So sometimes you see that movement. It's usually within Charlotte County residents. So it's interesting that they shed light on things like that. That's been a community concern. Are people coming because of the services? We've heard that many times, but based on what we're hearing from people on ground level dealing with this, they are from our community.
It's not the first time I've heard that accusation. And it's not the first, and it's not, I didn't hear it first in St. Stephen. I've heard it in Fredericton. I've heard it in St. John. I've heard it in Moncton. I've heard it in almost every community that I've worked that is experiencing homelessness. And I think it's misinformation that is being given to people by some belief that there's people that that desire being outside or homeless. And so it's part of the process here was breaking down some of those stereotypes, and it was important that Amanda DeGrucci, who was the director of adult services, says some of the people that we are at the shelter with are my classmates. Mm-hmm. So it should strike people that these are not strangers. These are your neighbors. These are your coworkers. These are people you went to school with, who are in a life and death crisis. And it was important for Diane Kearns, who also said, not everybody who starts out homeless has drug addiction, but they could end up there because of just the circumstances they're living in. Mm-hmm. So this is a strong, complicated conversation. But what I will say is that everyone belongs at the table. Mm-hmm. We can't have a healthy community if we're not involving everyone who needs to be a part of the conversation. That involves the residents living near the shelter, the businesses around the shelter, the people who operate the shelter, perhaps even some of the people living in the shelter. Yes. And then all levels of government working together to deliver a healthy community.
Mm-hmm. And I think at one point, Diane Kearns, that was really something that illuminated things for me a while back when we had her as a guest on Southwest Magazine here in studio. She explained something then to me and then in public at the panel on Sunday, because a lot of people wonder, why do drugs seem so much worse right now? Why are we seeing especially methamphetamine becoming so popular on the streets? We all know from experiences with people who have been on meth that it is definitely a hard drug, and it has what seem to be sometimes irreversible side effects with people. So she was explaining that in COVID-19, with all the borders shut down, and this is a really interesting point that might illuminate things for some people, that drugs weren't going over the borders like they had been prior to that. We all couldn't cross the borders, and it was not as easy for people that would transport drugs to get across borders either. New Brunswick was particularly shut down, with only residents of New Brunswick allowed in for a number of years without all that isolation. So that's when meth, which is easy to make, can be made in an abandoned home, let's say, those kind of circumstances. It's cheap and easy, and that's when we saw this drug really come into high use in New Brunswick, where it hadn't been as popular prior to, and there are devastating effects to the use of meth. So definitely that's just one piece of a puzzle. It doesn't answer the problem, but it definitely explains why we are seeing more of a drug like meth on the streets and have that popularity rise so immediately, and it's quite tragic, but at least it gives you an understanding of where it came from.
But we were able to hear a perspective from someone Neighborhood Works has helped. Take a listen.
16, 17 years ago, I got my life plate overloaded. There was a series of events within a year. My job of 20 years, they folded. My sister and my father died, and my wife and kids left me. I lost my house because I couldn't get another job. So that was all in 1 year, so I chose drugs. It started off a softer drug, And then as it progressed, it got into crystal meth. That was, you know, there were short windows of opportunity that I needed to get sober, but St. Stephen never had nobody here. There was no services, and after 4:30, they rolled the sidewalks up, and that's it. It took Neighborhood Works and John Howard Society to bring in a outreach worker, Amanda DeGrucci. She had been, boots on the ground kind of deal, and found me half dead on the streets and helped me by helping me enroll into a recovery program. She helped me proceed with getting my IDs back and stuff like that. Like, I stood in the middle of St. Stephen with a book bag on my back 3 years ago. That was it. Drug addiction robbed me of everything, even my teeth. But from that day 3 years ago, I had nothing. But now, I've got my IDs back. I've got a passport. I can travel the world. I got a car, apartment, and all that stuff now. So it's a simple mathematical equation. I tell everybody, education plus compassion equals hope, right? And Amanda showed me that compassion and got me to on the right track.
That was our interview with St. Stephen resident Tony Hall, who was helped by the services and support offered at Neighborhood Works. Quite a moving story. It was hard not to get teary-eyed just standing there with Tony and hearing his life story, but particularly hearing how Amanda DeGrucci was the one who reached out to him. You don't hear this in the entire interview, I don't think, but he did say to us, we need more Amandas in the world. And as you said before, when she said, these are my classmates, these are my neighbors, these are people we know in St. Stephen when we see them on the streets. There's someone I see on the streets in St. Stephen, and it breaks my heart because I know him from when he was a young boy. And I really hope there will be a day where an Amanda or even a you or a me can reach out to him and help him out. I don't know if that day will come, but we're all hopeful for those kind of things. But again, they are our neighbors.
Yeah, these are the stories that you want to tell, right? That we need to tell, I think, because we're always talking about the bad when it comes to homelessness. And I remember when I was at Global News, I did a series where I went to the Riverstone Recovery Center, and I was interviewing Dr. Sarah Davidson, who is leading the charge on safe supply, but also safe injection sites where people can go. And I understand that this is a controversial topic for a lot of people, but where people can go and do drugs in a safe and supportive environment, so that if they overdose, they can be treated immediately, or in essence to prevent overdose. And I remember asking her, would it be possible to speak to some of the people who are here? And she said, yeah, we can put the word out and they can come in. And so we set up in this room, one of the clinical rooms, and I was surprised, and I want to say probably shocked, because the door kept opening. It was one person, and then another, and then another, and then another. I think it was, 7 or 8 people that ended up sitting down. Not all of them wanted to be, have their faces on camera. So we silhouetted their hands or whatever to kind of protect their identity. There were some people who didn't know, their family didn't know that they were homeless and living in Fredericton. But there was one girl in particular who I won't forget ever. She said something to me. She had gone to university, life got in the way. Somehow she ended up, getting addicted to drugs, and her boyfriend overdosed and died. And she said to me, I don't know whether he did it on purpose. And it was a moment to me where she said, I can understand why people lose hope. And when Tony said education plus compassion equals hope, it struck me, and it reminded me of that conversation. Like, these are people, these are someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's brother, someone's uncle. They all have histories, they all have stories, and it's a pleasure for me to be able to tell them, and it was a pleasure for me to be able to do that series, and I encourage you to go read it. It's, and one of them actually received one of the tiny homes in 12 Neighbors. So a great story and a great outcome for that individual, but these are the stories that you need to tell, and this is how you get a healthy community, when everybody is able to find the right resources, become a healthy, productive member of society that ends up contributing back to their community.
And it's a moment too to talk about an interview we did here a couple of years ago with Darren, right after the state of emergency was declared in St. Stephen. Darren was someone living on the streets in St. Stephen, and he actually illuminated for me in the interview. We sat down for 10 minutes and wanted to tell the story. What's it like? What are they going through night after night on the streets? But he also mentioned that he was paying rent in a building that was owned by Annette Penkela of Starshine Properties. And that was, for me, a really illuminating moment. It led to us actually following that story, seeing what was happening. We couldn't, it was a big story to unpack, so we did have to give some of the information we found out to other journalists at bigger organizations. But it was Darren who pointed out something to me that I'd never considered, and I don't think a lot of people think that someone on the streets might have been paying rent not that long ago, but that was very much his case. And when he lost the apartment that he was able to afford, he couldn't find anything else. And, there were other factors at play, but definitely, and you've got to consider the whole when you are looking at a situation a person is in. And we were able to talk to Sam and Stephanie from the Willow Center a little bit about that too, because Stephanie Clark from the Willow Center was very revealing in her 5 minutes that she was given. When they were given 5 minutes to talk about what they do, she told a very personal story, one that I know for you probably touched a nerve as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we share a similar path in life, and in that, we were both part of the foster system, and we've survived through that, and we're given a path towards success, and we're giving back now in different ways. I consider journalism giving back in a way, and so it certainly touched me, but it showed you that there is cross collaboration between the services in St. Stephen. Nobody is working in a silo. They're working together to solve a problem that has no easy solution.
Yeah, and definitely I think that the takeaway for me was when you go to these kind of events, you don't know what the feeling of the crowd will be, what the mood will be in the room, how people respond to the information. And what was really beautiful is I felt like people were really listening and taking it in. They had questions and concerns that were very valid. But they were there to absorb and be a part of the community.
Yeah, I think we have to think about this. This is not an us versus them story.
Yeah.
This is an us story. And you and I contribute by telling the stories of the concerned neighbors, telling the story of Neighborhood Works, telling Tony's story. And other people contribute in other ways. This is a community story, and we all need to be on the same page about how we move forward. Take a listen to Sam Gullison and Stephanie Clark from the Willow Center.
I think that there's a lot of value in seeing different perspectives as well, and as a service provider and as a neighbor, we're kind of unique in the sense of we have more than one lens to share, and wanting to be able to show that to community in a different way and give that different perspective, I think, was important. And having people come together, and as a whole, being a part of a panel where we're not just talking about the Lighthouse Lodge, we're talking about all the incredible things that Neighborhood Works does and our involvement in different ways, not just as those neighbors and service providers next door.
There's a few reasons I felt it was important for me to share that. Is one, before I found that sense of belonging and that community, I just believed I could never experience anything, and I so desperately wanted to believe that I could be something, but all you hear is you'll never change, once an addict, always an addict, once you're doing these things, and I just, that felt so hopeless. And when we're thinking about people who are struggling with addictions or homelessness or group home kids or kids in the foster system, they can identify with that statistic and feel like, the statistic that 38% of foster kids end up being homeless. And I just want them to know for themselves, actually, that's not true. They 100% have everything in them that they need to succeed. They just need a community around them and the right opportunities. And for the community to know that as well, is that these people aren't defined by these experiences that they're living in. And with the right support and rehumanizing, we can actually, as a community, build people up out of homelessness. We didn't used to be a town that dealt with this. And when we're suffering and dealing with homelessness, of course we're going to use. And so when we look at it from that perspective, we have more compassion.
That was Sam Gullison and Stephanie Clark from the Willow Center in St. Stephen.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at the budget season underway in Charlotte County.
As we move forward, we're going to be deciding what to do with that $910,000.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. Budget season is underway in Charlotte County, as it would be for all local governments. While some people are preparing for the holidays, I'm preparing for local government budget season.
Can't you see my excitement?
I actually
You actually do get excited.
This is a great time, and I don't want to overstate it. Local governments do have a mandate to run in the black. They can't run a deficit. They are legislated to, but they also can't run a surplus either. They have to spend basically. I think last night Jeff Renaud said it has to be less than $5. Mm-hmm. So this is the time where councils are going to be talking about what they want to buy this year. Perhaps it's a new piece of equipment. Perhaps it's a set of roads that they want to pave. Perhaps it's new signage. But it's also when they talk about their utility budget and their operating budget, so what it costs to operate the municipality. So it's an interesting time, and you will see probably some councils saying, I want this or I want that, but it might be just too much money.
Oh, well, very exciting times, I guess. But what's your takeaway so far? You've looked at St. Stephen and St. Andrews. What's really hit a chord with you?
Yeah, so I want to talk first about the assessment process. So it's important to explain to people that fiscal reform has not happened for municipalities yet, which means that the only form of funding that they get is through your property tax. So the biggest thing people are going to care about is the tax rate,
right?
Or as some people might know it, the mill rate. So what that rate is it's set by the municipal council for every $100 of assessment. So what the government says that they do is they look at the assessed value of your home, they multiply that by the $1.50 per $100 of assessment, and then you get your property tax bill. And a portion of all of that money goes back to the municipality in which it was collected. So for example, in St. Andrews, I think it's $6.6 million this year. So that's the budget that they have to work in. And that's not a large budget, but this is not a large municipality either. In St. Stephen, I think it's somewhere around $9 million. So it's a little bit more. And I do want to say that there was an assessment freeze this year, which kind of made the hair on everybody's neck stand up in municipal government, because this is what they rely on. So it sort of seemed like they weren't going to make any ground this year. But when we got the assessment numbers, it was actually really interesting. Assessment still went up because there was exceptions to the rules for renovations and new builds.
Oh, okay. So did that make a significant difference or just slightly?
In some places it didn't. Like Macadam saw a negative, like a decrease in its assessment value. And that's pretty close to our neck of the woods. But every municipality in Charlotte County saw an increase, although all of them fell below the provincial average of 2.7%. So Grand Manan had an increase of 1.3%, Fundy Shores 0.9%, which was the lowest of all of the municipalities, but Fundy Shores is quite small. In St. Andrews, it was 1.8%. In St. Stephen, it was 1.5%, and in Eastern Charlotte, it was 1.8%. So St. Andrews and Eastern Charlotte were tied for the largest amount of assessment increase this year.
Okay, well, interesting. And then when it gets into discussions on what they're looking to do with the budget, what are you hearing just fresh into the conversations?
Sure. So I've attended 2 sessions with St. Andrews, and one was the operating budget, which I don't really have a lot to tell you about. Operating budgets are self-sustaining, especially in particular the utility budget is self-sustaining. So essentially, they're supposed to bring in enough money to operate it evenly. But at the at the St. Andrews Council, they were talking about a new Zamboni. They thought about buying an electric one versus the propane one, but the electric one is a lot more expensive. And the technology, Councillor Lehinen said, the technology is not really all the way there yet on electric Zamboni, so I'd prefer to buy this one and know that I'm going to get, a lifespan out of it. And we have a mechanic who knows how to fix that type of Zamboni. So that was one of the things. They talked heavily about paving for a parking lot to the tune of, I think, $478,000 at the old
Legion site?
That's right,
Okay.
at the old Legion site. Parking has been a big deal, as you know, for this council. They understand that the pressures that downtown St. Andrews is under when it comes to the tourism season, and also, finding places for people to park.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a big one for them. They did set aside $1 million for the wharf. We have no idea yet what's going to happen with the wharf. The structural assessment, I believe, has been given its go-ahead. The town is going to pay $99,000 for an engineering firm to come in and do an assessment of the wharf's structural integrity. So that was St. Andrews. St. Stephen has its own wish list, and this year it's centered largely around hiring 2 new people for their administrative staff. That's part of their operating budget. There is some controversy over a greenhouse that the council has approved, but they have a lot of wiggle room, almost $1 million in their budget that they have not used, and so they have to come up with a use for it. So there's a few options. They could lower the tax rate, which would be nice. I'm sure a lot of people would love that. Or they could use it for some of the other things that the council would like, because they have to spend that money. It can't just sit there. They could put some of it in reserves, which Marg Harding has asked a couple of times to build a new fire hall, but also for the airport as well. So there's some things that they can kind of do. But this is a very exciting time. This is like Christmas for municipalities, so to speak. But it is a tough process, and people will always be looking for a decrease in their tax rate. But as amalgamation has shown us, there's more services now for municipalities, more pressures, and so we have to expect that the decreases or the holding the tax rate may not be something that they can withstand for the foreseeable future.
And does it change in any type of ways when we know, let's say we know next year is an election year? We are all going to be going to the polls in May. It's very exciting. That's also my shout out to you at home, that if you are thinking of running for council, now's a good time to start getting out to meetings, understanding the process. The more people that run, the more we see democracy work. So it's always fun to encourage people at home. If you're thinking about it, now's the time to really start taking it seriously. Start understanding the process, and it's fun. It's quite fun. I can't wait to do municipal election coverage with you. But with that in mind, does that change how people address budgets at all when they know they won't be here necessarily for the entire year ahead?
Yeah, I think potentially it does. I think maybe it's in the back of your mind that you're not going to be there, and so you don't really think too far ahead. But I think for the councils that I've been a part of watching for the last year, they're really invested in their communities. They know what their communities want.
Yeah.
They are community members themselves, and so they understand the priorities and needs, and they're going to set themselves up. They have the deadline for budgets is November 30th. They're running out of time, so it's going to be important for them to decide. Although in 2026 we're going to have some new councillors at the table, so what that means for the budget could change completely, and I'm very excited for municipal elections. This is my version of the Super Bowl.
Oh, well, I've seen you in the World Series, so if this is your version of the Super Bowl, I can't wait for the excitement. It actually is pretty exciting because it's people stepping up to the plate in the communities that you know and live in. So it is pretty special. It's the most interesting level of government to watch.
Right, the most consequential. If you're not paying attention to your municipal council, I would encourage you to start paying attention, because this is where the decisions got made.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're young and you need a mentor, she is your gal as well, because I find you're enthusiasm for municipal politics quite contagious. So you get me excited about things like budget. Look how excited I am now.
We're going to take a listen to a small snippet of the presentation from Chief Administrative Officer Jeff Renaud on the budget for St. Stephen.
So our total expenditures, everything all in that we went through tonight, is $13,994,550. Which is right now is sitting as a slight reduction over our 2025 budget. And keep in mind, the number we talked about that I presented was $14.9 million if you kept your tax rates the same. So one of the things that we heard that I heard after the first public consultation session was that what was missed was the game where I gave people money to go spend on various things. And we gave them $1 million to go spend on various things. Next week, you guys are going to get to do it for real. We're going to have $910 that we need to allocate somewhere, which I can show you. So this is a screenshot from the wonderful portal that Frank and I get blessed to use from the government when we submit our budgets. That red box, it's counterintuitive. A negative and a red number there means your expenses are below your potential revenue. We can't hit the submit button on a budget unless that number is less than $5. We have to, because we have balanced budget legislation. So as we move forward, we're going to be deciding what to do with that $910,000, and working with you on that, and which is the goal of next week. So the goal tonight was to kind of get you a really good understanding where we stood today. Hopefully have the opportunity for you folks to go and talk to citizens and receive phone calls and emails and all those fun things you get about what to do with this money. Whether that's tax rate decreases or investing it in capital or, yeah, I mean, you will have, I'm sure, I know because the next slide is going to show you, you're going to have more requests than you have money. And that's why you're here, to make those decisions for us. But hopefully there is you have a nice week here of being able to have some dialogues out in the community. These are just some of the things that we already had on the list. So tax rates, I showed you that it's $50,000 for an 1 cent urban decrease in tax rate, $40,000 to get a 1 cent decrease in the rural tax rate. And then we have security, sidewalks, roadway, reserves. Kev's department is looking for a Zamboni, a new pickup truck. I know they desperately need a new fridge up in the kitchen. We have, Kev struggles to try and keep the bank at the St. Croix River from eroding underneath our nice paved trail. So there's work there. Mary talked about the solar lights project. We have, if we're going to get that done, we have to come to the table with some cash as well. Events department trailer, they have this hope for a trailer where they could store all those inflatables and things like that, so they can roll up to the fall fair, detach, drop the trailer, unload, and be ready to go. New AV equipment for the conference room. So you're up there. Many of you were up there last while with me, noticing we weren't using the overhead stuff. It's gone on us, so it needs to be improved. Well, hopefully that one's fixed. But the SCBA's that we talked about that aren't flowing through the operating budget anymore, the bunker gear for the fire department, a new vehicle, a backhoe, a dump truck. Some of these things have been on long-term plans for longer than I've worked here, like that backhoe for instance, and the salt shed. But there's lots of asks out there, and citizens will have more asks.
That was Chief Administrative Officer for St. Stephen, Jeff Renaud.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be sitting down with young leaders from our community, stepping into the role of mayor and fire chief for the day.
Because I know that some people don't have that much money, and I want them to have to buy stuff and other stuff.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
I got to cover a pretty cool council meeting today.
I was going to say, this is one of the highlights of the year when it comes to covering council meetings. It's mayor for the day and fire chief for the day. And today we also got a deputy mayor for the day. So it was pretty exciting right here in St. Andrews. It's Career Week in Charlotte County. I wonder if it is across the province. I just know that we get very busy on Career Week because we get to see all the young people trying out new jobs, or we've been to, you and I started off the week actually at St. Stephen Elementary School. This is before we get into mayor for the day. You and I kicked off the week with the Milltown Elementary students and St. Stephen Elementary School students at Career Day, where we were there for almost 3 hours talking to just class after class of young people that came through to get to learn about different careers. So that was extremely cool. Thank you to Katrina McLaughlin for inviting us once again to be a part of it, because it's fun to find our next volunteers and summer students.
And only one of them asked me how much money I make, so I only had to lie once.
That's true. And I said lots. Lots of money. But here for the council meeting, we had Eva Henderson stepping into Fire Chief Kevin Terrio's shoes for the day as the Fire Chief of St. Andrews for the day. And then on top of that, we had Sally Sorensen from St. Andrews as mayor for the day. And deputy mayor of the day was Lila Schmidt. So all women this year, actually. How exciting.
Wonderful. And it was the smoothest council meeting I have ever been a part of. And I made the joke because Layla and Eva sat in Councillor Mark Bennett's chair and Councillor Steve Neal's chair. And I said they've never looked better.
Never looked better, and made wonderful decisions for the town.
Yes.
Talking about free skating.
I mean, I have their motions right here because
Please.
I was so excited. These are great motions. Much better than the budget meetings I've been attending for the last couple of weeks. The first motion was a very generous one. The town of St. Andrews donates $200 to the Open Door Program charity as part of Municipalities Week, directed by the Vincent Massey Elementary School students. So, them people are spending some money today, and what a great cause.
And what a great cause. And Layla Schmitz, I will point out in her letter, because they write letters and they draw pictures to get selected. So it's a very competitive position that they all won. Layla said, and the reason she was chosen is she wanted to help out people who didn't have as much as her. She wanted to make sure everyone in the community had what they needed. And so what a great way to do that, going towards the Open Door program. And I know we'll see we'll see all three of them next week when we film Santa's Helpers. So again, that's students from across Charlotte County singing for really each other.
And it was exciting to see them participate in this. I mean, there's not very many opportunities across New Brunswick for kids to get on a television show and participate with their community leaders and their fire chief, who is a great example to them of community leadership, but also of bravery. Yep. So it was wonderful to see them participate, and they got to see kind of the nuts and bolts of municipal government, which is an important lesson to learn. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to take a look at what we're doing next week.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We've got some stuff that we're preparing for. We've got the end of the year coming up on us quite quickly. So we're working really hard to get the December edition of the print version of the Courier going, because you will be away for a couple of weeks. I will be away for a couple of weeks, roughly around the same time. So we want to get that done.
But I should point out, if you have the November issue of the Courier, which is out now across Charlotte County, obviously write us here at news at CHCO-TV. If you can't seem to find it, we'll let you know what stores have the most recent batch, because they disappear quite quickly now that it is a free publication. But there is in the November issue, for those of you who were thinking the December issue would have the Christmas guides. No, we're way ahead of you. The November issue has the guides to all the Christmas events we had prior to November 1st. So it won't have all of them, but I think there's like at least 40. in it. Yeah, there's a lot. There's craft fairs already started, so pick up the November issue of the Courier for your guide to a Charlotte County Christmas, because I'm very proud that we were able to pull that off.
Yeah, I do want to say this is like an exception to the rule, because this is a monthly edition. So when we deliver the paper, sometimes the event could be happening on the 5th of the month, and then by the time the 30th comes around, it's no longer relevant.
Yeah.
And so we really have to be careful about putting stuff in the paper. But because this was mainly late November leading into December, it was a good opportunity to do that kind of work. The other thing you will notice is that in the paper we did a special Remembrance Day page, and that we didn't get all of the Charlotte County Remembrance Day ceremonies. People didn't get back to me in time, that sort of thing. But there's definitely some places, St. Andrews, St. Stephen, Milltown, Musquash, where you can go and spend some time at a cenotaph or remembering in your own way on November 11th.
And for everyone who might not be able to be in Charlotte County, or might be just in your home for the day of, we will be live streaming and live broadcasting the Remembrance Day service from the All Saints Anglican Church here in St. Andrews. It's a bit of an annual tradition. That's why people from, that have moved to other parts of the nation, other parts of the world, are able to follow along with us, because this is obviously a special place for those of us from here to pay tribute to those who served for our country.
And it's going to be a privilege again this year to watch our very own Herb McGee place a wreath as he did last year. It was very moving to see him do that last year.
And this year he's 100 years old. So last year he was just a young 99-year-old when he placed that wreath. This year we got to do a feature on Herb in the first issue of the Courier, bringing it back to print. We did a tribute to Herb and his incredible story of being a tail gunner in World War II. At just 18 years old, he flew over 40 missions over France. He's been knighted by France since. I actually got to cover him receiving his knighthood here in St. Andrews when France made Herb a knight, which was pretty incredible. I can't believe the people we've had the opportunity to meet in our time here, people that have built not just our community but our country up to what it is. So it's a privilege to be a part of those celebrations on Tuesday. So it'll be a busy week. Otherwise too, there's a lot going on. I'll be sitting down with Carolyn Davies to hear the latest on the Passamaquoddy Lodge. I know that there have been these incredible plans underway. She's going to talk a little bit about where they're at and when they hope them to come into fruition, and what role the province plays.
It was interesting to see her come into the station to talk about that, because I remember covering that when I was at Global News, about this lack of movement on this kind of design that they wanted to create for the Passamaquoddy Lodge, which is unique and born out of a necessity during COVID-19. But you'll hear me on the panel, or you would have heard me on the panel talking about the government and sort of the things that they've promised but have not quite come to fruition. And I remember, saying in my emails back and forth, like, it's sort of me covering what's been promised, not what's happening, but what hasn't happened, more so than not. So it's interesting. I look forward to that conversation, and I will likely be writing something for the Courier.
And she did mention that there will be November 18th. Mark your calendars, around 2 p.m. I think it's November 18th. I will correct it if I get this wrong. At the W.C. O'Neill Arena, they will be having another information session on the lodge, where you'll hear directly from the board to see where they're at, what their issues are, in what ways maybe you can advocate and be a part of making sure the province pays attention and gets some answers sooner than later to make this project a reality. And I was able to remind all the kids, although it turns out they were clearly well aware that Santa's Helpers was around the corner, because
the kids know.
I was a Christmas enthusiast. People were already in Christmas sweaters at Career Week. And that's not because we made them. We do make you wear your best Christmas sweater or t-shirt on Santa's Helpers singing days, but that's coming up next week. St. Stephen and Milltown are going to kick us off, and I guess you already know it. They have the Christmas spirit already. So we will be coming to a school near you. If you are elementary school agent in Charlotte County, you probably know your date already. So we look forward to seeing you as we gear up for Santa's Helpers on November 30th.
Of course, I'm excited. Last year was my first year. What a tremendous production. There are so many people we squeeze into this little tiny studio, but what a fabulous representation of community.
Well, it's always a pleasure to sit down with you on this show, and also every day with you here at CHCO.
It's my pleasure to be a part of this every week. Thanks for watching this week Uncut. We'll see you next week. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.